1973. The Vietnam War was finally ending. Watergate was consuming a presidency. Inflation was tightening its grip on American households. And a generation of Black Americans who had watched their greatest leaders assassinated, their neighborhoods burned, and their demands ignored, turned to music. Not just for comfort, for truth. What happened in Black music during 1973 was not an accident. It was a reckoning. Artists who had spent years performing inside systems designed to limit them suddenly began operating on entirely different terms. Some fought their labels for creative control. Some poured private heartbreak into public recordings. Some wrote songs about desire, dignity, and survival that the world was not fully prepared to receive, and received them anyway. "15 songs made this countdown, but behind each one is a story most fans have never fully heard, a song recorded in grief, a career nearly destroyed before it reached its peak, a #1 hit that almost belonged to someone else entirely, a goodbye disguised as a love song." And one artist who placed 3 songs inside the top 15 in a single calendar year, something almost no one in the history of popular music has ever done. This is not just a countdown. This is the real story of 1973. Before this countdown goes any further, if you love classic R&B and soul music and the legends who built it, subscribe to this channel right now. Every week we go deeper into the music, the stories, and the history that shaped Black culture forever. Drop a comment below and tell us which artist or song changed your life. And stay with us until the very end, because the #1 song on this countdown carries a story that will change the way you... Let's get into it. We begin at number 15. And the group that opens this countdown spent nearly a decade being overlooked before one song announced their arrival to the entire world. Number 15, the O'Jays, Love Train, Philadelphia International Records, 1973, February 1973. A record climbs to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it does something almost no soul record had done before it. It calls out specific nations by name and invites every last one of them onto the same train. England, Russia, China, Egypt, Israel. In a world fractured by the Cold War and sitting days away from open conflict in the Middle East, 3 men from Canton, Ohio, looked into that chaos and sang about unity with a joy so genuine it was almost defiant. That record was Love Train. Those men were the O'Jays. But here is what most people never knew about that moment. By the time Love Train reached #1, the O'Jays had already been grinding through the American music industry for nearly a decade. They had released records on Imperial, on Bell, on Neptune. Talented enough to fill any room they walked into, but never quite receiving the commercial breakthrough their performances consistently promised. That changed when 2 men from Philadelphia decided to build something the industry had never seen. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff did not simply start a record label. They built a sound, lush orchestration, gospel-rooted harmonies, rhythm sections designed to make you feel something before a single word was sung. Philadelphia International Records was their answer to every limitation the major labels had placed on Black artists, and the O'Jays were among the first artists to prove what that answer could produce. Love Train was not simply a hit record. It was the opening statement of one of the most significant chapters in the history of black music, a declaration that joy and idealism were not naive, they were necessary, and the OJs had waited long enough to deliver it. The OJs proved that a decade of patience could produce a #1 record, but the next artist in this countdown did not have the luxury of patience. He was working against something far more personal, and the song he created from that urgency became one of the most hauntingly honest recordings of the entire year. Number 14 is next.
You want to steal my brother.
Number 14, Timmy Thomas, Why Can't We Live Together? Gladys Records, 1973. Some songs arrive quietly and stay forever. Why Can't We Live Together did exactly that. No elaborate production, no full band, no strings.
All we want is some peace.
Just a Hammond organ, a rhythm machine, and a voice asking one of the most direct questions anyone put on record in 1973. And the world stopped to answer it. The song reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became an international hit, yet the man behind it remained one of the most quietly under-recognized figures of his era. Timmy Thomas was not an overnight sensation chasing radio attention.
Why can't we live together?
He was a formerly trained musician from Evansville, Indiana, who had played keyboards alongside Donald Byrd and worked the sessions circuit before landing at TK Records in Miami. He knew exactly what he was doing when he sat down at that organ.
Tell me why, tell me why, tell me why.
What most people never realized was that the song's radical simplicity was not a limitation. It was the entire point. Thomas stripped the production down to almost nothing because the question itself needed no decoration.
No matter what color.
With the Paris Peace Accord signed in January 1973 and a generation still carrying the weight of Vietnam, Why Can't We Live Together was not a rhetorical question. It was a wound asking to be acknowledged. Decades later, that wound was still open. Artists across multiple generations returned to this song because its question never found a permanent answer. Sade drew from its mood. Producers sampled its spirit. And Timmy Thomas, who built something timeless from almost nothing, proved that the most powerful statement sometimes requires only a voice and the courage to ask what everyone else was afraid to say out loud. Timmy Thomas built something immortal from almost nothing. But the next artist in this countdown built an entire empire, and the price that empire extracted from the people inside it is one of the most complex stories in the history of black music. Number 13 is next. Number 13, James Brown and the JBs, Doing It to Death. 1973 had a heartbeat. James Brown supplied it. Doing It to Death, released under the name Fred Wesley and the JBs, reached number 1 on the R&B chart and announced something the rest of the music world was still scrambling to fully understand. The groove James Brown had been perfecting since the mid-1960s was not slowing down. It was evolving, getting tighter, getting deeper, and in 1973, it was pointing directly toward a future that would shape decades of music still to come. But the name on that record matters more than most people ever stop to consider. Fred Wesley was not a side player. He was a formerly trained trombonist from Mobile, Alabama, whose arrangements and musical intelligence shaped the JB's sound in ways that James Brown's name alone could not fully communicate. The decision to release records under the JB's banner was both a creative choice and a business one, and for the musicians inside that organization, the difference between those two things carried very real consequences: compensation disputes, demanding performance schedules. A working environment built entirely around one man's vision of perfection, and yet what those musicians produced together was extraordinary. The locked groove of doing it to death, the rhythm locked on the one beat, the horn stabs, the call and response, the percussion architecture became a direct transmission into the DNA of hip-hop. Producers across the following 3 decades returned to this record because it contained something that could not be manufactured after the fact. It had to be felt in the room the night it was recorded. James Brown built a machine so powerful it outlasted almost everything around it. And the musicians who ran that machine quietly helped build one of the most sampled catalogs in American music history. James Brown created a sound that generations of artists would borrow from. But the next group in this countdown had something borrowed from them too, their entire early career, by a label that never fully recognized what it had, until one phone call from one of the greatest singers who ever lived changed everything. Number 12 is a story about what happens when talent finally finds the right home. Number 12, The Spinners, One of a Kind, Love Affair. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being talented enough to know exactly what you are capable of and watching the world remain unconvinced. The Spinners lived inside that pain for years. One of a Kind, Love Affair reached number 1 on the R&B chart in 1973 and announced something that should have been obvious long before that moment, that this group from Detroit carried one of the most extraordinary vocal blends in the history of soul music. But before Atlantic Records, before Philadelphia producer Tom Bell, and before the commercial breakthrough that finally matched their talent, the Spinners had spent years at Motown watching their gifts go largely unrewarded. They were signed to the most powerful black-owned label in America. And they were overlooked anyway. Motown's roster during the 1960s was extraordinary. Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, The Four Tops, and the promotional machinery behind the label naturally prioritized its biggest names. The Spinners existed inside that system with genuine talent and minimal momentum. By the time their Motown chapter closed, they had released records that deserved far more attention than they received. What changed everything was a phone call, and the person who made it was Aretha Franklin. The Queen of Soul personally recommended the Spinners to Atlantic Records, a gesture of artistic generosity that redirected the entire course of their career. Atlantic paired them with Tom Bell, a classically trained producer from Philadelphia, whose harmonic sophistication elevated the group's natural vocal gifts into something genuinely breathtaking. And then Philippe Wynne arrived. Wynne's improvisational instincts and emotional range gave the Spinners a live wire quality their earlier recordings had never fully captured. His voice could move from tender restraint to explosive feeling within a single bar, and on One of a Kind, Love Affair, that gift is present in every moment. What the Spinners created at Atlantic was not simply a commercial resurrection. It was proof that the right environment could unlock talent that had been waiting patiently for years. If you are enjoying this countdown and discovering stories behind these legendary artists that you never knew before, subscribe to this channel right now. Every legendary career has chapters most fans have never fully explored. Like this video if these artists have meant something to your life.
Got to have her, yeah. You got to make a little sacrifice. Got you on my mind, hey mama.
Share your favorite memory, song, or album in the comments below, and stay with us because the artists still coming in this countdown have even more remarkable stories waiting to be told. We are just getting started. Number 11. Gladys Knight and the Pips. Neither one of us wants to be the first to say goodbye. Soul Records, 1973. Sometimes the most honest thing two people can do is admit that something is over and still be unable to walk away first. Neither one of us wants to be the first to say goodbye. Reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973 and won the Grammy Award for Best Pop Vocal Performance by a duo or group. It was a stunning achievement, and it arrived at one of the most quietly complicated moments in Gladys Knight and the Pips' entire career. Because while the world was celebrating this record, the group was privately preparing to leave the label that released it. Their years at Motown had produced genuine moments of beauty, but also genuine frustration. The label's infrastructure was built around its biggest stars, and promotional priorities rarely aligned with what the Pips deserved. They had watched extraordinary talent receive modest support while the machinery around them moved in other directions. By 1973, both sides understood that the relationship was reaching its conclusion, and then they recorded a song about exactly that feeling. Whether intentional or not, neither one of us functioned as a farewell disguised as a love song to people who knew something was ending but could not bring themselves to say so first. The parallel between the lyric and their Motown reality gave the record an emotional weight that extended beyond its romantic surface. The song was written by Jim Weatherly, a songwriter from Mississippi, whose work would intersect with Gladys Knight's career in ways that neither of them could have fully anticipated at the time. But she will return to this countdown with something even greater, a record that became the defining moment of her entire career. Before that return, number 10 belongs to an artist whose voice carried an intimacy that felt almost too personal for radio. And the private storm behind those recordings makes them even more extraordinary to hear today. His ability to write emotional truth translated across cultural boundaries in ways that produced two of 1973's most enduring soul recordings. But it was Gladys Knight's voice that made the difference. Her ability to hold resignation and longing simultaneously, to communicate dignity even inside heartbreak, placed her among the greatest vocal interpreters of any era. Every choice she made on this record was deliberate, every held note earned. This was not simply a hit record. It was a masterclass in emotional restraint, delivered at the exact moment it was needed most, and it was only the beginning of what 1973 had waiting for her. Gladys Knight closed one chapter with a Grammy-winning farewell that the world could not stop playing. Number 10. Al Green, Call Me, Come Back Home. There are voices that entertain, and then there are voices that reach through the speaker and find something in you that you did not know needed to be found. Al Green had that second kind of voice. Call Me Come Back Home reached number 1 on the R&B chart in early 1973 and captured Green at a moment of extraordinary creative confidence. On the surface, it was a romantic plea, a man asking someone he loved to return. But underneath that surface was something more complicated. Something that Al Green himself was still working out in private. He had grown up in the church, raised on gospel music in Jacksboro, Tennessee, where the boundaries between sacred and secular were treated as serious moral lines. And by 1973, he had become one of the most sensually magnetic figures in popular music, a man whose stage presence and vocal intimacy made audiences feel personally addressed in ways that very few artists could manage. That contradiction was always present, and it gave his music a tension that no amount of studio polish could fully conceal. The man who made that tension audible on record was producer Willie Mitchell. Working out of Royal Studios in Memphis, Mitchell built a recording environment unlike anything else operating in 1973. The high rhythm section, Leroy Hodges on bass, Howard Grimes and Al Jackson trading drum duties, Mabon Hodges on guitar, created a sound that was simultaneously loose and precise, warm and aching. Mitchell's philosophy was built around feel rather than technical perfection, and every Al Green record from this period carries that philosophy in every bar. Call Me Come Back Home was recorded inside that environment, and it shows. The song breathes the way real emotion breathes, with hesitation, with longing, with the kind of quiet desperation that does not announce itself, but simply settles into the room and stays. Because when a voice that honest sings about longing, you believe every word. Al Green was singing about love while carrying something much larger inside himself. What most listeners did not know was that the private storm Al Green was navigating during this period would intensify significantly in the years immediately following 1973. His struggle between the life he was living publicly and the spiritual convictions he carried privately was moving toward a breaking point that would eventually redirect everything: his career, his identity, and his relationship with the music that had made him one of the most celebrated artists of his generation. But in 1973, all of that was still interior, still unresolved, and somehow that unresolved quality made these recordings even more extraordinary. The next artist in this countdown was also carrying something extraordinary, except his was a creative vision so far ahead of its time that even the label that owned his contract was not fully prepared for what he was about to deliver. Number 9 belongs to a young man who rewrote the rules before most people realized the rules had changed. Number 9, Stevie Wonder, Higher Ground. He was 23 years old, and he was operating on a level that most musicians never reach in an entire lifetime. Higher Ground reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart in 1973, but the chart numbers alone tell only a fraction of the story. What Stevie Wonder had accomplished by the time this record arrived was something the music industry had genuinely never witnessed before. A young black man had walked into Motown at age 21, allowed his childhood contracts to expire, and renegotiated his entire relationship with the label from the ground up. Higher royalties, full creative control, the right to own his own masters. In 1973, those were not standard terms for any artist at any major label. For a black artist at Motown, they were revolutionary. Wonder had used that freedom to produce a creative run that caused fellow musicians and critics alike to recalibrate what popular music could accomplish. Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, albums arriving in rapid succession, each one demonstrating a compositional range and instrumental mastery that seemed to expand with every project. He was writing, arranging, producing, and playing most of the instruments himself, building entire sonic worlds from a single creative vision. Higher Ground was born inside that vision. Wonder laid down the clavinet riff first, that immediately recognizable, percussive, locked groove that announces the song before a single word arrives, and built everything else around it. The track came together quickly. The urgency in the recording was not manufactured. It was the natural result of an artist working at the absolute peak of his creative instincts. The lyric went somewhere unexpected for a soul record. Wonder was writing about reincarnation, the soul's journey through multiple lives, the spiritual obligation to keep reaching, keep growing, keep moving towards something higher than where you currently stand. That a song carrying that philosophical weight reached #1 on the R&B chart in 1973 was itself a remarkable cultural moment. And then the year delivered something that gave those lyrics an almost prophetic quality. In August 1973, Stevie Wonder was involved in a serious automobile accident that left him in a coma for several days. The injuries were significant. The recovery was uncertain. And when he emerged from that experience, Wonder himself acknowledged that Higher Ground, recorded before the accident, felt different to him afterward, as though the song had known something he had not yet understood. He had been reaching for higher ground, and the universe had answered in the most sobering way imaginable. That he survived, that he continued, that the music kept coming, speaks to something in Stevie Wonder that charts and awards have never been fully adequate to measure. Stevie Wonder survived 1973 with his genius intact and his creative momentum unbroken. He will return to this countdown more than once. But first, number 8 belongs to a woman whose voice carried the full weight of American soul music on its own terms. And the story of how one of her greatest recordings found its way to her is one of the most unexpected creative journeys of the entire year. Number 8, Aretha Franklin, Until You Come Back to Me, That's What I'm Gonna Do. There is a particular kind of ownership that has nothing to do with legal rights or publishing contracts. It is the ownership that happens when a singer takes a song and makes it so completely her own that the world forgets anyone else ever touched it. Aretha Franklin did that with Until You Come Back to Me, and what most people never knew was that the song did not begin with her. It began with Stevie Wonder. Wonder wrote the song years before Aretha ever recorded it, capturing it himself on tape, but never releasing it as a single.
After so many miles, how good you guys look.
The composition traveled quietly through the music industry until it found its way to Aretha's Atlantic sessions, where she transformed it into something that felt as though it had been written for her voice and no one else's. That ability to absorb a song completely and return it to the world as a personal declaration was the defining characteristic of Aretha Franklin's artistry, and by 1973, she had been demonstrating it for more than a decade. She had grown up in Detroit, the daughter of Reverend C.L. Franklin, one of the most celebrated Baptist ministers in America. The church was not simply where Aretha learned to sing, it was where she learned what singing was for. Gospel music gave her a theological relationship with emotion, the understanding that a voice fully committed to a feeling could move people in ways that transcended entertainment entirely. That foundation never left her Atlantic recordings, regardless of how far from the church the subject matter traveled. By 1973, more than 5 years had passed since Respect had made her an international icon, navigating life after a record that defining is its own particular challenge. The world tends to hear everything an artist does afterward through the filter of their greatest moment, and Aretha was aware of that reality. Her response was not to chase the past, but to keep moving forward with the same fearless creative commitment that had produced it. Until You Come Back to Me reached #1 on the R&B chart and demonstrated that her voice had not simply maintained its power, it had deepened. But Aretha's contribution to 1973 extended beyond her own recordings. She had already demonstrated in previous years that her investment in black music was communal as well as personal. Her recommendation of the Spinners to Atlantic Records had redirected an entire group's career. Her presence in the industry carried a gravitational force that shaped opportunities for artists around her, not just audiences in front of her. That combination, extraordinary individual artistry and genuine investment in the community of black music, is what makes her legacy impossible to fully contain inside any single song or any single year. Until You Come Back to Me was one more proof of what she already was. Aretha Franklin turned another artist's song into her own permanent statement. The next group in this countdown did something remarkably similar. They reached back into their own catalog, took a song the world had largely forgotten, and rebuilt it from the inside out into something that redefined what they were capable of. #7 is one of the greatest reinvention stories in the history of soul and funk music. #7, the Isley Brothers, That Lady, Part 1 and 2. Not every second chance announces itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly inside a catalog most people had already moved past, waiting for someone with enough courage and enough vision to recognize what was already there. In 1964, the Isley Brothers recorded a song called Who's That Lady? It was a solid, respectable soul record that received modest attention and then faded into the background of a decade, overflowing with remarkable music. Most groups would have left it there. The Isley Brothers were not most groups. In 1973, they returned to that song and rebuilt it entirely. New arrangement, new instrumentation, new energy. The result, retitled That Lady Part 1 and 2, reached #6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and announced to anyone still doubting that the Isley Brothers were not simply surviving the new decade, they were leading it. What made the transformation possible was a young man named Ernie Isley. The youngest of the brothers had spent his teenage years absorbing everything he could from the musicians moving through the family's orbit. One of those musicians left a permanent impression. The result was a record that crossed genre boundaries without abandoning its roots. Equally important was the foundation the Isley Brothers had built beneath their music through T-Neck Records, their own artist-owned label, one of the earliest and most successful examples of black artists controlling their recording infrastructure and the economic rights attached to it. T-Neck gave them the freedom to make decisions that no outside executive could override, to reinvent a 9-year-old song because they believed in it, to release it on their own terms. That freedom produced That Lady, and That Lady produced one of 1973's most enduring records. In 1973, they were just getting started. We are now inside the top 7 of this countdown, and if these stories are deepening your love for classic R&B and soul music, subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss another documentary that goes this far behind the music. Drop a comment below and tell us where you think these artists should rank, or share the song from 1973 that still takes you straight back. And if you think there is a legendary name that deserved a spot in this countdown, say so. This community was built for conversations like that. Stay with us, because the 5 entries still ahead of us carry the most powerful stories, the biggest chart moments, and the most emotional revelations in this entire documentary. You do not want to step away now. The Isley Brothers proved that ownership and vision together could produce something timeless. The next artist in this countdown understood both of those things deeply, but in 1973, he was navigating a creative moment that was more complicated and more personal than almost anyone on the outside could see. Number 6 is coming, and the story behind it reframes everything that came after it. Number 6, Marvin Gaye, Trouble Man. Every artist who reaches a genuine creative peak faces the same impossible question afterward. What do you do next? For Marvin Gaye, that question arrived with extraordinary weight. What's Going On had not simply been a successful album. It had changed the conversation about what a black artist was permitted to say through popular music, about war, about poverty, about spiritual longing, about the condition of a nation consuming itself. Critics had called it a masterpiece. Audiences had responded with genuine devotion. And now the entire industry was watching to see what Marvin Gaye would do with the creative authority that masterpiece had earned him. His answer was not what anyone expected. Rather than pursue a direct follow-up, Gaye accepted an assignment to score the soundtrack for a film called Trouble Man, a blaxploitation-era picture centered on a street operator known simply as T. On the surface, it appeared to be a commercial detour, a way to fulfill obligations while buying time for the next major statement. But Gaye approached the project as something entirely different. He saw T not as a fictional character in a moderately budgeted film, but as a reflection of something he recognized inside himself. T moved through a dangerous world with confidence and composure while carrying private vulnerabilities that the world around him was never permitted to see. That portrait was not purely fictional for Marvin Gaye. It was uncomfortably familiar. By 1973, the pressures surrounding him were significant and compounding. His marriage to Anna Gordy, sister of Motown founder Berry Gordy, had become deeply strained, creating a personal and professional tension that was difficult to separate. His financial relationship with the label carried complications that extended beyond standard industry negotiations, and beneath the public image of creative triumph, he was managing emotional struggles that his music was beginning to express more directly than his conversations ever would. The Trouble Man soundtrack became a space where those tensions could breathe without being fully named. The instrumental passages carried a brooding, self-possessed quality that felt less like film scoring and more like private confession set to music. And the title track, released as a single, reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100, demonstrating that Gaye's audience was prepared to follow him into more complex creative territory than the label had sometimes assumed. What Trouble Man ultimately represented was a bridge between the social consciousness of what's going on and the intimate vulnerability of what was already taking shape in Gaye's creative imagination. The next album he was preparing to release would be the most personally revealing music of his career, a record that would make everything he had built before it look like preparation. The storm was still gathering, but the music it was about to produce would last forever. Marvin Gaye was building towards something that 1973 had not yet fully seen, and when that moment arrives in this countdown, everything will make sense. But first, number 5 belongs to a woman who had spent her entire career being extraordinary in rooms that were not quite ready to give her the recognition she deserved. In 1973, that changed. And the song that changed it became one of the most beloved recordings in the history of American popular music.
Not so long.
Number 5. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Midnight Train to Georgia, October 1973. A song about a woman choosing love over ambition climbs to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It stays there for 2 weeks. It wins the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Song.
Going back to find.
And 50 years later, the opening piano notes alone are enough to stop a room. That song was Midnight Train to Georgia, and the journey that brought it to Gladys Knight and the Pips is one of the most unexpected creative stories of the entire decade.
A simpler place and time.
It began with a phone call that had nothing to do with music. Jim Weatherly was a songwriter from Moss Point, Mississippi, a former college football quarterback who had traded athletics for songwriting and was quietly building one of the more distinctive catalogs of the early 1970s.
I need one so.
During a telephone conversation with actress Farrah Fawcett, she mentioned casually that she was taking a midnight plane to Houston to visit her parents. Weatherly heard something in that image. He wrote a song around it almost immediately, originally titled Midnight Plane to Houston, recorded his own version, and sent it out into the world. The song traveled. Cissy Houston recorded a version that brought it closer to the soul tradition Weatherly had been reaching toward. And eventually it found its way to Gladys Knight, who changed the destination from Houston to Georgia, grounding the story in the American South in a way that gave it an entirely different emotional geography. That decision transformed everything. Georgia carried specific weight for a black woman born in Atlanta in 1944. Gladys Knight had grown up in the South during segregation. She had won amateur night at the Apollo Theater at age 7. She had formed the Pips with family members, her brother Merrill, her cousins William Guest and Edward Patton, and built a performing career through the 1950s and 1960s that was defined by extraordinary live performances and frustratingly modest commercial returns. Their response vocals, their harmonic instincts, their physical energy on stage, all of it was present in the recording itself. The line between lead and support dissolved completely into something that functioned as a single, unified emotional statement. What the song actually said deserves more than a passing glance. A woman watches the man she loves fail to become what he dreamed of becoming in Los Angeles, a city that, in 1973, represented the specific kind of American promise that often arrived with a specific kind of American disappointment. Rather than stay and build a different life without him, she chooses to follow him back to a simpler world, not because she has surrendered her own identity, but because she has decided that love, on her own terms, is worth more than any version of success the city was offering.
On that midnight train, just he did. He said he would.
For a black woman in 1973 to make that declaration through a #1 pop record, on her own terms, in her own voice, was not a small thing. It was a statement that the world heard clearly and has never stopped playing. Gladys Knight finally received everything her talent had always deserved, and she received it in the most complete way imaginable. We are now inside the top 4, and the 3 artists remaining in this countdown represent the most extraordinary creative achievements of the entire year. Number 4 changed what a black musician was allowed to want for himself, and the story behind how he got there is unlike anything else in 1973. Number 4, Stevie Wonder, Superstition, January 1973. The new year had barely drawn its first breath when a record arrived that announced with absolute certainty that something fundamental had shifted in black popular music. Superstition entered the Billboard Hot 100 at the beginning of the year and climbed directly to number 1. It did the same on the R&B chart, and for anyone paying close enough attention, the record felt less like a new release and more like a declaration. A young black man from Saginaw, Michigan, had complete creative control over one of the most commercially powerful records in the country, and every musical decision on that record, from the first note to the last, was entirely his own. That clavinet riff that opens the song is one of the most immediately recognizable moments in the history of popular music. 7 notes, a locked percussive groove that grabs the listener before a single word has been sung and refuses to let go for the entire duration of the track. Wonder built the song around that riff, laying it down first, then constructing everything else on top of it with the systematic precision of an architect who already knew exactly what the finished structure would feel like before a single wall went up. He played most of the instruments himself. He produced the record himself, and he did it inside a creative freedom he had fought directly for, the renegotiated Motown contract that had given him ownership and authority that no black artist at a major label had previously secured on those terms. But here is what most people never knew about Superstition. Stevie Wonder did not originally intend to release it as his own single. The song grew partly out of a creative collaboration with rock guitarist Jeff Beck, who appears on the Talking Book album. Wonder had written Superstition during those sessions and offered Beck the opportunity to release his own version. The original agreement suggested Beck would record the song for his own album, while Wonder held his version for a later release. The timeline did not cooperate. Wonder's version was released first, and what had been conceived as a generous creative gift became instead one of the defining records of the decade. Beck released his version afterward, but the world had already heard Stevie's, and there was no competition. The song belonged to the voice and the vision that had created it. The lyric carried philosophical weight that most number 1 records do not attempt. Wonder was arguing against irrational thinking, against the surrender of reason to unfounded belief, at a moment when American culture was searching desperately for something solid to hold on to. Watergate was exposing the corruption at the center of the nation's highest office. The promises of the 1960s had not fully delivered what they had seemed to offer, and here was a 23-year-old black man telling anyone who would listen that the answer was not mysticism or blind faith, but clear-eyed engagement with the world as it actually existed. That a song carrying that argument hit number 1 speaks to something important about where black audiences, and American audiences broadly, were in January 1973. Stevie Wonder placed this record at number 4 in a countdown of 1973's greatest soul recordings, and he still has 2 more entries above it. That fact alone tells you everything about what kind of year he was having. Superstition announced 1973. But Stevie Wonder is not finished with this countdown. Before his return at the very top, number 3 belongs to a man who had already changed black music once and was about to do it again in the most personal way imaginable. What he recorded next was not simply a love song. It was a confession, and the world received it like nothing it had heard before. Number 3, Marvin Gaye, Let's Get It On. There are moments in music history when an artist stops performing and starts confessing. August 1973, Marvin Gaye released Let's Get It On, and the record reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 within weeks. It stayed there. It became the title track of an album that sold millions of copies and permanently altered the language available to black male artists when addressing romantic desire in popular music. But the full story of how that record came to exist is far more layered than its chart position suggests. It began with Ed Townsend. Townsend was a singer and songwriter who arrived at the Let's Get It On sessions carrying material with originally spiritual intentions, songs that were reaching toward themes of divine love and human connection in ways that reflected his own personal and religious journey. Gaye heard something in Townsend's raw material that he recognized and redirected. The spiritual framework remained, but Gaye pulled the focus decisively toward the physical, arguing in essence that the two were not opposites at all. That argument was not simply a recording strategy. It was a genuine conviction rooted in the gospel tradition that had shaped Marvin Gaye since childhood in Washington, D.C., where his father was a minister in a Pentecostal church. The church had taught him that the body and the soul were connected. That love expressed physically was not a departure from the sacred, but an extension of it. Let's Get It On was Marvin Gaye making that theological argument through a soul record, and making it in the most direct, unguarded terms he had ever used publicly. There was also a deeply personal dimension driving the album's urgency. During the recording sessions, Gaye encountered Janice Hunter, a young woman whose presence ignited something in him that gave the entire project its specific emotional intensity. His first marriage had been strained for years, carrying the particular complexity of a personal relationship entangled with one of the most powerful figures in the music industry. The feelings that Janice Hunter inspired gave Gaye access to a vulnerability and a directness that his earlier romantic recordings had approached, but never fully inhabited. Berry Gordy and Motown had concerns about the album's explicit nature. Those concerns were real, and the negotiations around them were genuine, but Gaye's post-What's Going On leverage, the commercial and critical authority that album had earned him, gave him the standing to prevail. The record was released as he intended it. What followed was a cultural shift that extended far beyond the singles chart. Let's Get It On changed what a black man was permitted to say out loud about desire. Before this record, the conventions of soul music, even at its most romantic, maintained a certain decorum, a certain distance between the feeling and its direct expression. Gaye removed that distance entirely. He sang about wanting with a vulnerability and an honesty that male artists in popular music had rarely been permitted to display without apology. The generation of artists who followed absorbed that permission completely. Luther Vandross studied these recordings. Maxwell studied them. D'Angelo studied them. Every male R&B artist who subsequently built a career around intimate, emotionally transparent romantic music owes a specific and traceable debt to what Marvin Gaye said out loud in August 1973. And underneath all of it, the chart success, the cultural impact, the artistic liberation, was a man who was still navigating a private world of considerable difficulty, the financial pressures, the personal complications, the depression that ran beneath the creative brilliance like a current that never fully stilled. Marvin Gaye made one of the most joyful, sensually alive records of the decade from inside that complexity. That is not a contradiction. That is the full definition of what it means to be an artist. He had already placed one song in this countdown at number 6. Now he stands at number 3 with a record that changed the rules of romantic expression in American popular music, and someone else still sits above him. Marvin Gaye told the world exactly what he felt, and the world made it number 1. But there is one position remaining in this countdown, and the artist who holds it placed not 1, not 2, but 3 songs inside the top 15 of 1973 in a single year. What he accomplished has almost no parallel in the history of popular music. The number 1 song is next, and the story behind it is the perfect ending to everything this documentary has been building toward. Hashtag 1. Stevie Wonder, You Are the Sunshine of My Life. We have arrived. 15 songs, 15 stories, 15 windows into one of the most extraordinary years in the history of Black American music. and standing at the very top of this countdown is an artist who has appeared in it 3 separate times, a fact that, even now, 50 years later, is almost impossible to fully absorb. The number 1 song of 1973 is You Are the Sunshine of My Life by Stevie Wonder. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It won the Grammy Award for Best Male Pop Vocal Performance. And it did something that Superstition and Higher Ground, 2 of the most sophisticated records of the decade, approached from different angles but never quite achieved in the same way. It made the entire world feel welcome. There is a particular kind of artistic courage required to write something genuinely, radiantly joyful. Complexity is easier to defend. Darkness carries its own credibility. But pure, unguarded happiness, the kind that asks nothing from the listener except that they receive it, requires a confidence in the human capacity for love that not every artist possesses. Stevie Wonder possessed it completely. The song opens with something unexpected. 2 guest vocalists, Jim Gilstrap and Lanny Groves, sing the opening lines before Wonder's own voice arrives. It was an unusual creative decision, a song this personal, introduced by someone else's voice. But that choice said something important about how Wonder understood music, not as individual expression delivered to a passive audience, but as a shared human experience that belonged to everyone in the room simultaneously. The album it came from, Talking Book, had already demonstrated the full range of what Wonder was capable of in this period. It contains Superstition on one end of the emotional spectrum and You Are the Sunshine of My Life on the other, and the distance between those 2 records represents the full breadth of human feeling, funk and tenderness, social philosophy, and romantic surrender. All of it produced, written, and largely performed by the same 23-year-old man inside the same creative period. To place that achievement in its proper context, consider what Stevie Wonder accomplished across 1973 as a complete story. He survived a near-fatal automobile accident that left him in a coma. He recovered with his creative instincts not simply intact, but somehow sharpened. He produced 3 records significant enough to appear in the top 15 of one of the most competitive years in soul music history. He operated under a renegotiated contract that gave him creative control and economic rights that black artists at major labels had never previously secured, and he did all of it before his 24th birthday. You Are the Sunshine of My Life is the number 1 song of 1973, not simply because of its chart performance or its Grammy recognition, though both were extraordinary. It sits at the top of this countdown because it represents something that all 15 songs in this documentary, in their own individual ways, were reaching toward. The full range of what black artistry could express when given the freedom, the resources, and the recognition to simply be itself. Marvin Gaye said what a black man was allowed to feel about desire. Gladys Knight said what a black woman was allowed to choose on her own terms. The OJs said what an entire world was allowed to hope for. Al Green said what faith and longing sound like when they cannot be separated from each other, and Stevie Wonder said all of it, across 3 records, across an entire year, with a clarity, a sophistication, and a joy that the music has never fully stopped radiating. 1973 was not simply a year. It was a declaration, made in studios in Memphis, Detroit, Philadelphia, Miami, and Los Angeles, delivered through voices and instruments and grooves and harmonies by black artists who had earned every note through decades of work, sacrifice, patience, and unshakable belief in what their music could do. And 50 years later, every single song in this countdown is still saying it. If this documentary brought back memories, taught you something new, or deepened your love for the legends who built classic R&B and soul music, please subscribe to this channel right now. Every week we go deeper into the music, the artists, the hidden stories, and the remarkable careers that shaped Black music history forever. Like this video if these artists have meant something real to your life. And leave a comment below. Tell us which song from this countdown hits you the hardest, which artist you want to see featured in a future documentary, or which 1973 record we should have ranked higher. This community was built for conversations like that. The next countdown is already coming. More legendary Black artists, more iconic songs, more untold stories, more moments that changed music forever. We will see you there.